Zachy the Sun is your host on this most epic journey through pop culture's past. Hold on to your butts. This is Nostalgia Theater.
Brought to you by the Movie Film Podcast.
Hi everybody, welcome to Nostalgia Theater. This is Zachy. Now, I've spent some time on this show in the last year already talking up the influence of the TV show MASH, and my guest today is someone who was there on the ground for much of that show's revolutionary run, actor and activist Mike Farrell. Mike joined the cast in the fourth season as Captain B.J. Honeycutt, and he stuck around all the way to the finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, which aired exactly 35 years ago today, if you're listening to this episode the day that it drops, and was watched by 106 million people, becoming the highest-rated TV episode of all time, a record which still stands to this very day. In the years since, you have seen Mike on such shows as Providence, Law & Order SVU, and Supernatural, and you've heard his voice as Clark Kent's foster father, Jonathan Kent, on the animated Superman series in the 90s. He's also a vocal advocate for a variety of important issues, including campaigning against the death penalty and the war in Iraq. And he's here with me today to talk about his time as B.J. Honeycutt, as well as his thoughts on our current political situation. Please give it up for my guest, Mike Farrell. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show. We are very excited here at Nostalgia Theater. I've mentioned in previous episodes how important MASH was to me as a person and obviously to society as a whole. So how does it feel 35 years removed from what remains the highest-rated TV episode of all time?
Well, it's hard to put into words. And, none of us knew, we all knew we were doing what we thought was a good show, and we knew from the reaction of the audience that it was being embraced. And I heard some pretty startling things, I must say, when during hiatuses between the shows, between the seasons, we would, some of us would travel to different situations, and the words that I heard from people outside this country about how much the show meant to them really struck home to me. And I remember coming back after one particular hiatus to sit down with Alan on the first day we were shooting, and I said, "Are you hearing out there what I'm hearing?" And he said, "Yeah." And we kind of looked at each other, thinking, trying to grasp what that meant. And I've forgotten what the rest of the conversation was, but the impact of it, I think, on all of us was that we began to have an understanding that what we had was something quite extraordinary, and that it behooved us to, not that anybody was sloughing off anyway, but behooved us to make sure that we maintained our commitment to the credibility of the show, to the excellence, if I may say so, of this show, but more to the absolute commitment that everybody had made to make a show that really spoke honestly to some very difficult things within the realm of entertainment and, to some degree, dramedy, I guess, as somebody called it, comedy and drama. And even with that, I have to say that none of us, I think, fully realized that what we were part of was a social phenomenon, a societal phenomenon, that a show that has, continues to resonate with people today, 35 years later, in a way that is spelled out every day in the mail I get from people thanking me and thanking us and lauding the work we did and expressing such heartfelt appreciation that it really is, it continues to be moving to me, I must say.
I have to say, speaking from my own experience, I experienced MASH entirely in the past tense in that I was born in 79. So by
Mm.
the time I had an awareness of these things, I mean, it had long been off the air as a first run show. And so, growing up in the 90s, my concept of the show was something that I was aware of because of, Mad Magazine and things like that, would do like their
Hmm.
parodies and stuff. So I was aware of it, but I knew it as, oh, it's the thing that comes on before Simpsons reruns, which is how I started watching it. But I'll tell you, the first time I went through the series all the way through, beginning to end, was when they put out the DVD, the box set of the whole series
Yeah,
on DVD.
yeah.
And so I purchased it shortly before my first kid was born. And so while I would be rocking him to sleep at night, and I was just watching all of MASH. So inside of 4 months, I blitzed through the whole series. But here's the pin on that story is now here we are. My oldest, he is now going to be 11 this week, and he and I are watching it together.
Isn't that great?
And
Isn't that great?
yeah, it really and he says, oh Dad, can we watch MASH today? And we're up through the sixth season already now.
Well, that's thrilling. I must say, I hear that sort of thing from people, and the thing that really gets me is that they say, I watched your show originally with my dad, or sometimes with my grandfather, and now I watch it with my son or my grandson. And it's that sense of the immortality, if you will, of the experience is really, really deeply moving.
Yeah. Well, and I want to circle back to the finale, but I think before we even do that, I'd like to wind the clock back and talk about your history with the show before it was part of your history. So, I mean,
Mm.
you and Harry Morgan and David Ogden Stiers had the experience of getting to be viewers of MASH first before you became,
Yes.
and so, I mean, what was the show like for you? Were you a fan, or were you just a casual viewer? Were you aware of it?
I wasn't. I've never been much of a television viewer, but I wasn't. I mean, I was aware of the existence of the show. I will say this: I was under contract at Universal Studio, and got to know a guy there who was a casting director. His name was Burt Metcalf, and I remember one day seeing Burt on the lot, and I said something, and he said, "I just wanted to tell you, I'm leaving." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going over to 20th. I'm going to be part of a new show." And I said, "Well, good luck. Great, that's wonderful." And 2 years later, I was still under contract at Universal, and I'm getting out of order here. A friend and I were double dating, and we went to for some reason I went to his house to get him before we were to pick up the ladies, and I said, "Let's go." And he said, "Wait a minute, I can't go yet." And I said, "What's the matter?" He said, MASH is on." I said, "What's that?" And he said, we just had to stay and watch the end of this episode he was watching. And I remember seeing, I can't tell you what the episode was about. I can only tell you that I saw a scene with Gary in it, Gary Berghoff, Radar. And he so captured me, this innocent, this naive, this 18-year-old kid in the midst of straight off the farm, in the midst of this chaotic situation and war raging around him, and his trying to figure out who was what and what was who, and be the man that he was expected to be. I was so impressed by his work in that scene that I never forgot it. I thought, God, what kind of a show is this that is able to do what these people are doing? And sometime later, I was still under contract at Universal. I was offered a pilot to do a lead in a pilot on a series. And I said to the producer, "Well, that's very kind of you to offer it to me. I'd like to read the script." And he said, "Sure, of course." And I did. And I went back to him and I said, in reading it, it was one of those 70s sitcom joke shows,
Oh, sure.
And I went back. I said, "Thank you, but no, thanks. It's not for me." And he said, "You're turning down the lead in a television series?" He said, "This is a television series." And I said, "Yeah, I understand that."
That's bold.
And he said, "Why?" And I didn't want to say, "Look, I think your show is stupid. I think the jokes are dumb, and I don't feel like I want to be part of that." I thought about it for a second. I said, "Well, it's not MASH."
Wow.
And he looked at me, and what I was telling him was, it's not about anything, this show you're writing. There's nothing sort of beyond the jokes. And I walked away thinking that I had conveyed, a thoughtful response. I didn't want to insult the man, etc. And shortly thereafter, my agent called and said, there is the possibility that Wayne Rogers is going to leave MASH, and they want to know if you'd come over and be willing to have a meeting. There's no promise, they're not even sure about Wayne's situation, but they would like to know if you'd like to come and talk. And I said, "God, would I?" Mm-hmm. And I did. I said, "Wait a minute, can I? I'm under contract here at Universal." And he said, "We'll worry about that later. If you want to take the meeting, and go, you have to take the meeting." Wow. And that was the beginning of the process that ended up with me being.
So you're in a position where you have the possibility of joining MASH. My first thought is, did they have any inclination of continuing the Trapper character with a different actor, or was it always it's going to be, before you're even involved, was it always we're going to have a new character and a new actor as a new character?
That was part of the conversation when I went there. I said, we talked about each other and talked about our hopes and dreams and talked about the show, and I said I was a huge fan, and I remember saying, "Look, I've done 2 television series, I've done a movie, I've done this, I've done that, and I haven't been this nervous in an interview for a long time. But I'm thrilled to be here." And I said the only, they'd made clear that they appreciated my being there and that they weren't sure that there was going to be any need for a consideration of a character to replace Trapper or replace Wayne. And I said, but the one thing I have to say is that I would not be interested in playing Trapper John. Sure. I think it would be a mistake to have an actor come in that just try to step into Wayne's boots and be another Trapper John. And they said, "No, you're absolutely right. That's not what we intend to do. We know we have an idea of who this character is, but we're going to take advantage of the fact that in wars people transfer and things happen, and so
it's not like Bewitched where she's got to be married to the same guy, so just swap
exactly.
out.
I think it's one, that's a great way to kill a show, but secondly, I think it really is an insult to the audience, and but they were incredibly clear and very, very aware of the opportunity they had if, in fact, the contract or whatever the dispute was with Wayne didn't work out. They had thought very seriously about what they were going to do, and it did not involve another actor coming in to play Trapper.
Did it worry you? I mean, I having watched the switch from Wayne Rogers, who was great as Trapper, so memorable, to BJ, who I love just as much, and it strikes me, were you concerned? Here you are coming into the 4th season. You're the co-lead of this hit show. Or were you at all worried that what if I'm the guy who kills MASH?
I can't tell you how worried I was. In that conversation where I said I wouldn't, I didn't want to be a Trapper, they said, "No, what we have in mind is a character by the name of BJ." BJ were the initials of the Billy Jurgensen, the cinematographer on the show.
Oh, funny.
What we know about him is that he's going to be married and have a child and not be a womanizer like Hawkeye and Trapper. How does that feel to you? And I said, "Are you kidding me? To be a character that models fidelity in American television, I think that'd be a wonderful thing to do." Anyway, so I left not knowing if there was even a future possibility. But then I got a call. My agent wanted to know if I would be willing to do a do a screen test. And he said, "This is not about your acting ability. They all know that. They want to see you on camera with Alan to see what the chemistry is like. And there are 2 other actors that they're going to test as well." And I said, "Okay." And we did. And actually, that very day, I got the call that it was mine, and Alan, in fact, wanted to know if I could have dinner with him so we could talk about things. And I said yes and yes. But in answer to your question, I thought, oh my God, this is two things concerned me. This is a highly thought of group of actors that dearly care about each other. Am I going to be the unwanted stepchild that comes in here and sort of ruins the pie? Number one, and then number two, what if the audience hates me? I'm going to be the guy that sank MASH. I'm going to carry this around my shoulders for the rest of my life. But first day on the set, I walked into stage 9, and Gary Berghoff walked up, shook my hand, said, "Welcome." Loretta did the same thing. Bill Christopher did the same thing. Everybody just greeted me warmly and just made me feel immediately comfortable, and how thrilled they were that I was there. And then, of course, my only worry was September when the season dawned and, BJ was introduced, what was going to be the result. And fortunately for me, the result was positive.
7 years worth of positive, I guess, right?
8 years, actually.
Oh, 8 years. That's right. You actually you answered my question, which was, in your debut episode, you have become, part of the group by the end of the pilot. You and Hawkeye are already a pair, and that was my question: was how quickly did you adapt and become part of this family behind the scenes? And I guess from what you're saying, day one.
Actually, before day one, with that dinner with Alan, it was really wonderful. First of all, it was a tremendously generous thing of him to do, to sort of break the ice, welcome me aboard. But he wanted to talk about the show. He wanted to talk about his commitment to it and about what it meant to him, what he hoped we could create together. It was just an astonishingly generous embrace, and that kind of broke the ice for me, so that when I came on set and everybody responded in exactly the same way, it was like I was one of the gang, and I will tell you, on that day we sat down. I had done a lot of work in television, a fair amount of work in television, a couple of series and soap and a lot of episodes and stuff. But I was always concerned, and increasingly so over time, with writing that was not what it might have been. A lot of writers in television did what I used to call radio writing. They'd write stuff that you didn't have to say because you were seeing it, and they didn't have that comprehension yet. But at any rate, so we sat down, and it was explained to me that what we were going to do the first day was sit around a table and read the script that we were going to shoot, and then we'd rehearse as many of the scenes as we had time to do, so that we could start shooting the next day. Well, that was pretty exciting for one thing. Rehearsing and reading were not the norm in series television, as far as I know.
Yeah.
And then we read through page 1 through page 36 or whatever it was. And Gene Reynolds, who was the exec producer and also the director of that episode, said, "Okay," we got to the end of it, and I guess there was applause. Everybody was thanking the writers and what have you. And then Gene said, "Okay, page 1." And I looked at him, and I kind of didn't know what he meant because we had just read the script. And he said, "Oh, Mike," he said, "here's what we just go through page by page, and we want to hear from you guys as to if there are any questions, any concerns, anything you think doesn't work, any suggestions." I have to tell you, it chokes me up today to remember that conversation, to think that these geniuses that had put this show together were willing, and not only willing, but encouraging about actors making their thoughts known, making any comments, asking any questions they might have. And I heard these cast members suggesting, over time, not all in that day, saying, this is a great joke, but I think it'd work better if Bill said it than if I said it. That might have been Loretta, or it might have been Jamie, or it might have been whomever. And I thought, Jesus, this is really something. This is what I later came to think of as a creative community. And it was that from the first day to the last.
And in terms of the behind-the-scenes process, I mean, a lot is commented on and written about how the show has there was the Larry Gelbart phase, and then after he left, how the senses, and maybe this is something you can illuminate, Alan Alda sort of had, it was reflective more of his personality. First of all, am I characterizing that rightly, and is that something that you perceived, that gradual change?
Well, yes and no. Larry marked the show, but Larry worked for. First of all, Gene, I don't think gets enough credit to.
Oh, sure, yeah.
In that whole construct, but Gene and Larry. I mean, Gene hired Larry, and Gene was a veteran in television. He had an understanding of what the show should be and could be. He came to Larry because he knew Larry would get it, and he did. And the same was true of Bert. He hired Bert to be his casting director, but Bert also just sort of, they were like one. They really thought through what they wanted this show to be. When I came aboard, they handed me reams of material that they had done, interviews with doctors and nurses from Korea, doctors and nurses from Vietnam, people GIs who had been wounded and gone through the MASH, or in Vietnam the later incarceration of what the MASH was.
Sure.
But the depth of detail and the way in which they dug and cared and thought about representing this so truly and honestly was just amazing. And Larry's gifts were, God knows, one only has to say the name of Larry Gelbart, and everybody knows, comic genius. I mean, again, really was astonishing. But Alan was always involved on the creative end. Alan wrote episodes. Alan directed episodes. And I think what I say, and it's illustrative, not to be taken quite literally, but it's illustrative of what the issue was when Larry came to us and said he was going to be moving on. We were all heartsick, but at the same time we understood that people burn out, and he was tired from having done so much work. He wrote almost all of most episodes, even though some of them were credited to other people. The job then, the challenge became, how do we maintain the level of writing? And what they did is replace Larry with about 7 guys, and ultimately women, who came to try to keep the level of integrity and comedy and drama and the spirit of the show. And over time, I mean, they kept, some people were better than others, but there was always this desire to make the show as relevant and as intelligent and as funny and heartwarming and moving as it always had been under Larry. So, but if Gene and Larry and Bert were the triumvirate when Larry left, I guess it's fair to say Alan kind of stepped in and at least used his intelligence and his talent and his vision to insist that we do nothing less than the best that they had done before.
And obviously, Alan wrote and directed several episodes, and that's something that you had opportunity to do later. How did that come up? Was that something that you had been thinking about for a long time, and the opportunity arose?
Sort of. I used the term creative community before. When Harry and I came in, we came in together. I did the first 2 weeks of the show, and Harry came in the next. Harry had been a director. Alan had been directing along at that point. And one day I had a conversation with Bert, and we knew each other a bit. He knew that I had done some writing, but nothing on the scale of a MASH. And I said, I got an idea for a show. What would you think of this? And I ran it by him, and he said, I think that'd be great. Why don't you write it? I said, well, I can take a shot. No, he said, don't worry about it. We go into the room after you do your first draft, and we'll say, how about this, and what about that? And so that was the beginning. I mean, there was this sense that everybody wanted everybody to do anything they could, and whatever contribution they could make was welcomed. And the same thing happened. I said at one point, I forgot down the line, I said, Bert, I've been watching and listening, and I'd kind of like to take a shot at directing. And he said, absolutely. And that's what happens.
Well, in terms of the landscape against which the show aired, I think this is sort of interesting too, because the show started, and the film too, emerged at a point when, I don't know, sociopolitically, there was a sense of people losing faith in the government having the best of intentions. I mean, we're in the midst of Vietnam. MASH, the film, was they had to put the little thing at the beginning saying this is Korea, just so that people didn't think it was about Vietnam, because it was clear, and I think the show certainly carried that forward. But we saw a change around, Ronald Reagan comes in, and his whole thing is his election in many ways was like a reaction to or repudiation of the being down on America sort of thing that was being perceived in the 70s. So I'm curious if you all on the show felt like the show was maybe not as relevant in the early part of the 80s as it was in the 70s. I don't know if that question makes sense, but
I guess I'd have to say no, we didn't think that. We thought we had a job to do, even more so at that point.
Sure.
I'd say a story that's personal because it started before I came to MASH, but I had done I guess a couple of television series before that. Each only lasted a season, but they'd gotten some attention, and I was under contract at Universal, as I told you, and had done a number of shows and a good film or two. And people started asking for autographs. I had actually done a soap before I did the first of the primetime series, so there was some understanding of me as an actor. Not that I was a big deal, but that some people knew that I was an actor, and people would ask for autographs. And I always felt that was sort of an odd thing. Part of it's my nature about being singled out, different from other people. But so I thought, well, if I'm going to sign an autograph, I want to at least impart something that means something. So I signed Peace. And this was during the Vietnam War, when I was very much involved with the anti-war movement. So I always signed my name after I wrote the word peace with an exclamation point after it. And I remember when it started, a friend of mine said, "Don't you think that's going to create a problem for you?"
Isn't that funny? Just saying peace is deemed problematic.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you have the time, I will. I'll tell you another story that
Please.
applies. as I said, I was involved in the anti-war movement, and I did a show called The Interns in the 70-71 season.
Yes.
And with Brad Crawford and I was one of a group of young interns. And at the time, I was wearing a peace symbol. And when they cast me and we started doing the show, I decided I'd wear the peace symbol as the doctor. And a guy from the hierarchy of the studio came down. He said, Mike. I said, yeah. I said, we're a little concerned about you wearing the peace symbol. And I said, really, why? And he said, well, there's a war on, and there's a lot of controversy about it. I said, yeah, I know that, and I think that this doctor would be somebody who would be letting his feelings be known. And he said, well, there are a lot of people out there that support the war that would really be offended by and I said, well, yeah. But I said, there's an issue with the length of people's hair too, and Chris Stone was an actor who was one of the interns, and I said, you got Chris's hair, it's going to be an issue for some people, and they're going to be offended by that. And he said, well, yeah, but he's sort of the attraction for the teeny bopper crew. And I said, well, I'll be the attraction for the piece. And he said, well, look, he said, we've got this issue with equal time on the air. And I said, well, how about this? Are you suggesting you want me to wear my peace symbol for one episode and a bomb for the next episode? And he just looked at me for a second. He got up and walked away, and I wore the peace symbol through the time of doing the show. And do you know the name Lou Ayres?
I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Lou was a movie star who did one of the great anti-war films, and after it, he declared himself as a conscientious objector. And in, I believe it was World War II, he served, but I served as a medic because he wouldn't take part in the fighting, and it cost him his career. And he came and did an episode of our show of The Interns one time, and he came over to me and he said, "I love it that you're wearing that." I thought, okay.
It became a badge of honor at that point.
Indeed. Indeed. So at any rate, so yes, so peace, and actually Alan, I don't want to say copied me, but he liked the idea of signing peace, and he did it for a long time after when it started, when I was on the show, and he saw that I was doing that. So peace and being spokespeople for the anti-war movement, or finally, the year I came on the show was the year that we admitted our defeat in Vietnam. But there was still very raw feeling. There were still very raw feelings in the country about it. So, but we continued, and I remember we did a show. I don't know if it was in the Reagan years or not. It may well have been, wherein a wonderful actor named Alan Fudge played a man who was so shell-shocked by his experience. He was a GI. And he came to us, and he thought he was Jesus Christ.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And Alan, Captain, I'm blanking on it, Alan Arbus, who played Captain
Sidney
Friedman, yeah, treated him. But after that, we got some extraordinary hate mail from fundamentalist Christian groups thought we were being terribly inappropriate and blah, 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 blah. And then we got some mail from a minister. I remember he was in Texas or Alabama or someplace. He said that was one of the finest explications of faith I've ever seen. Wow. He thanked us up and down for that show. So, we kept trying to do things that were important and relevant to the human tragedy that the war was, and the process that people go through. We didn't really understand then much about PTSD, but we certainly knew that there was a price people were paying.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad that, you know, the MASH ends, and it almost coincides with this renewed sort of rah-rah jingoism that we see reflected in things like Rambo and whatnot. And I mean, Rambo, ironically enough, began as a novel about a veteran suffering from PTSD. It's nothing like what it became, where, you know, President Reagan was like, we're going to be like Rambo, you know. And yet history repeats itself, because what you're talking about with your experience on the interns, it could just as easily be a reference to what was happening in the media around the invasion of Iraq.
Absolutely. Yep. And continues to be now with what's going on in Afghanistan and Yemen and Somalia and so many other, forgive me, places.
Well, and I wanted to ask, I mean, with everything going on today, I saw you about a year ago, a little over a year ago, on Tucker Carlson's show. And I'm just thinking, God, this guy, you know, like I find Tucker Carlson infuriating, and I'm watching you just with the patience of a saint, trying to explain your position, and I wanted to ask, I mean, how do you do that?
Well, you know, I guess I've learned to try to be as calm as possible and just try to be rational and reasonable, and hope that some of their audience will at least understand that they want to paint us all as loonies and crazoids and commies. That you know, some of us are thoughtful people. So you take on when people ask you to take a position and articulate a position that is controversial. You whether you mean to or not, you represent a certain portion of the population, and I think you have to do so rationally and thoughtfully.
And I mean, at the time you spoke to him, or at least that I saw, you were advocating for the Electoral College to, you know, kind of pull the brake lever, you know, before getting us into where we are now. I'm just curious. I mean, here we are, more than a year in, and has what you were concerned about, has that materialized?
More so, more than I feared. Let me just say up front, I think he's a sick man. I think that I'm a believer in the diagnosis that has been articulated by some, the narcissistic personality syndrome disorder.
Yeah, right.
But it's a malignant narcissistic personality disorder is the one that, according to some psychiatrists and psychologists, is incurable. I do think that he's an ill man, and I think he's being taken advantage of by people with an agenda of their own who, as Mitch McConnell said, you know, he'll sign anything we can put in front of him. So it scares me a lot. I think he's doing tremendous damage to the country, and I'm sickened by what I see and frustrated by the fact that not more people are standing up and letting their feelings be known. But I think there'll be a reckoning. I'm not sure in what form, but I'm sure there will be one, and I think it will be. Can result in a much more hopeful time for this country.
Yeah, I've been listening to the audiobook of the Michael Wolff book. And I mean, it's one of those things where you say, if we discount even X% of this, what we're left with, you know, the coffee grounds that we're left with are still freaking terrifying.
Horrifying. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah, I don't know quite what to think of him. I mean, I've seen him and heard him and looked into a little bit of his background, and you know, the guy was there, and he heard some pretty scary stuff, and I see no indication that there's anything over the top about what he's reported, because I see it every time this man speaks.
I remember being a kid and hearing people talk about President Reagan and being like, "Oh, he's a clown," and this and that, and I don't have a full concept of that. Although, I mean, retrospectively I do, but it feels like this is that on steroids.
Absolutely. Ronald Reagan, I think, was not the smartest, brightest bulb in the chandelier, as they say, but he had some a position that I didn't agree with, and I thought he was an embarrassment in many respects. And in his later years, I think he was truly sick. I think the Alzheimer's that they got to after he left office had taken hold well before he left office. But on some level, there was a heart involved in what he did. Whether you agreed with his deeply felt positions and feelings and tendencies or not, there was at least a kind of personal commitment. I get nothing from this man other than a selfish desire for personal aggrandizement, and he sees most of that most evident to him in financial success, and the two are really a prescription for disaster for this country.
But I mean, in a broader sense, I mean, your work as an advocate for these causes that you feel very passionately about. I mean, the death penalty is something you've very strongly and consistently been against. I mean, is now granted, the ding on Hollywood is, oh, it's a bunch of liberal elitists or whatever, but
sure.
I would say, and maybe this is something you can address. It takes principle to that consistently advocate for things that a lot of people don't want to talk about, whether right or left. I mean, the death penalty, for example, is a messy issue that is a lot of people would just rather stay away from completely.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
Yeah.
First of all, we used to get, particularly during the war. Now, I was involved in the civil rights movement and, the black and brown and gay and women's movements, etc. But during the war, it got really nasty, which is not to suggest it didn't get nasty in those other ones. But there was this issue in the war of whether or not you had the right to articulate a position that was against the position of your government. And for me, it's always been the right of the, not only the right, but the responsibility of a citizen to be involved and to be informed and to let that be known if your involvement in information suggests that the country is in the wrong mode, going the wrong direction. And when people, and they have, attacked or argued or asserted that I was being inappropriate because I'm a public figure to some degree, I said, look, I'm a citizen first. When one achieves some success as an actor, you don't turn in your voting rights. You don't give up your citizenship. You still, it seems to me, have a responsibility to be as involved and as informed and as articulate about your information, the information that you hold, as you can. And that involvement takes different forms for different people, and I understand that. But for me, being out front, taking advantage, frankly, of the platform that's been made available to me is something that I feel is perfectly appropriate. Some people in my community jump into issues because they think it's cool. Some because they think it will raise their level of visibility. Some abstain. Some stay out of it because they're afraid that being part of controversial issues will cost them in their careers. Others think it's inappropriate to take advantage of the platform made available to we have much as Bill O'Reilly used to like to say, Hollywood was a bunch of left-wing liberal crazies, or Sean Hannity used to call me his favorite left-wing celebrity when we used to disagree on his show. The community is a community like any other. It has left-wingers and right-wingers. It has stupid people and very smart people. It has people of all colors and people of all persuasions and people of all religious views. And to call it Hollywood or to condemn Hollywood as being a bastion of people who feel a particular way is only true to the degree that being a creative person makes one capable of understanding what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes.
Wow.
For the rest of it, it's whatever it is for whatever that turn of events, that opportunity, that possibility, wherever that directs you is up to you.
Well, with that in mind, I want to wind our conversation back to the finale of MASH because it seems to dovetail here. As I said, the show ends, and in some ways the zeitgeist is changing a little bit. What was the impetus behind ending the show? I'm assuming, based on the ratings of the finale, the popularity waning was not an issue.
Exactly right. The impetus was in season 10. I said to Alan, "How long do you see this going?" And he said, "I've always thought about 10 years would be the end of it." And I said, "Well, I've been wondering because it feels to me like it's time to move on." And he said, "To me too, but we have an obligation to talk to the rest of the cast." And I said, "Oh, cool, that's great." And we did, as we always had. Whenever any kind of controversy came up around the show or around somebody's life or around political or whatever, we would sit down as a company and talk it through. And so we had a long, heartfelt discussion about it and finally made the determination that, yes, we thought it was appropriate to end the show because we didn't want some network executive. First of all, we didn't want the show itself to kind of devolve. We didn't want to ride the horse downhill, I guess is the phrase that comes to mind. We didn't want it to be less than it always had been. We wanted it to stand for something. And we thought, we're taxing the possibilities of stories here, although they had, I must say, the producers and writers had done a fabulous job of finding ways to make it new year after year. But everybody finally said, okay, we all agreed with a caveat. I think Harry and Jamie and Bill decided maybe they wanted to. Well, but that was down the line.
Right.
First of all, we said we wanted then to let the studio know that was our decision. First of all, let our producers know, which they agreed to which they agreed, and then to let the studio know. And once we did, of course, there were convulsions. I mean, the studio was making a mint, and the network was making a bigger mint, and they didn't want to see this thing let go. And we said, well, we think it's time. So they said, and the one thing we said was, we want to have an episode that ends the war.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that we can say goodbye and thank you, in a way, so that we can bring this thing to an end. And and so that the characters have an opportunity to say that to each other. And I'll never forget, a guy came down from the top offices of the studio, and he said, "We can't do that." And I said, "We can't do what?" And he said, "We can't have an end of the war episode." And I said, "Why not?" And he said, "Do you remember The Fugitive?"
Okay.
The David Jansen show. I said, "Of course. We all know The Fugitive, sure." And he said, "Well, The Fugitive, David Jansen decided he wanted to end the show, and but he wanted to resolve it. He wanted to make it be known that the one-armed man was found, and Dr. whatever his name was not guilty of the crime, and you know." And he said, and that killed the show in syndication. So you can't have an
if that's not like network thinking in a nutshell, right? We don't want people to know the Korean War ended.
I said to him at the time, I mean, we all looked at each other, and I turned to the guy and I said, "You know, it may surprise you to know this, but a lot of people know that the Korean War ended." He got up and walked out of the room.
Well, let me ask you. I mean, you mentioned obviously the Aftermath show that followed, the following year, but also the Trapper John MD show had been going. I mean, that wasn't Wayne Rogers, but it was still sort of keeping the franchise fires lit. Did no one come to you and say, "Hey, how about a BJ Honeycutt show where he's back home or whatever"? Nobody came to you with that.
No. BJ could have stayed. BJ could have been part of the next show, but it was just not in the cards for me.
Yeah.
I will tell you another funny story, if you don't mind. The Trapper John show with Purnell was on the air for the last couple of years of our show.
Yeah, it was a little overlap. Yeah.
Yeah, and when CBS decided to do it, we let out a holler and said, "Hey, bullshit. This is really a crappy thing to do." And they said, CBS said, "Oh, no, this has nothing to do with MASH. There's no connection." And we said, "There's a pretty obvious connection, that you're taking advantage of here." No. This is a show stands on its own. Blah 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 blah. Well, the practice of the writers and producers, and Bert told me this story later, was to the show was running its own self. Nobody from the network came down and made sure we were doing good shows. They knew what was going on. But every once in a while, Bert and company would send down to CBS a short précis of the next 5 or 6 episodes we were working on. And one of them they sent was, Hawkeye is heartsick at learning that his old friend Trapper John is killed in an automobile accident. and the guy from CBS said, Bert did that was a gag. I mean, they were just doing that. The guy from CBS called him. He said, "Bert?" And he said, "Yeah, what?" He said that we have a problem here. And he said, "Well, really? What's that?" And he said, "Well, this thing about you've got Trapper John being killed. You can't do that." And he said, "Why not?" He said, "Well, we have this show, about." But Bert said, "Well, you told us it didn't have anything to do with us." And he just didn't know what the hell to do until Bert started laughing and said, "We're just pulling your leg."
And what I've read about that show is that what the legalese, they say it's actually the Trapper John from the movie, not the show. Uh-huh. And I'm like, well, 6 of one, half a dozen of another.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But so the show is ending, and I just this morning to prep before I was talking to you, I put on the last few minutes, and I'm watching you and Al Alda say goodbye to each other, and I'm getting emotional watching this, and I mean, what was that like for the two of you, saying goodbye not only to each other but to these characters?
Yeah, it was Bert directed that episode, and he said, the movie, and he said, I've never seen a situation where I've had to tell actors not to cry so much. We were, all of us were, we knew that we were going away from, and we knew it was going to be tough. It was not the last episode we shot because the post-production on that took a lot longer, so we had to do another couple of episodes after that. But even so, it was representative to us of the end of what was just an extraordinary experience, one that will never be repeated in our lives. And it was as hard as you can imagine to go through that process. And I remember Loretta saying, every move I make, I think, this is the last time I'll ever be here. This is the last time I'll ever do this, And we wept. It was excruciating and wonderful all at the same time to be able to do this thing that put the cap on everything that we had been doing for so many years, everything they'd been doing for 11 years, for me for 8, and to show the price that people pay, to Hawkeye's craziness, Mulcahy's hearing, Winchester's loss of his music, so much of this, the issues of that are attendant to human beings going through an experience like that, and we did it pridefully, and we did it happily, and we did it, and we wept as we did it because we knew it was going to be the end.
I have to give credit here to my friend Rob Kelly, who's actually launching a new MASH podcast, MASHcast, and he's a even bigger fan than I am, and he BJ Honeycutt is his favorite character, and this is a conversation I had with him where he said that seeing Hawkeye and BJ say farewell to each other, he as being a younger person, it was the first time he saw men be able to be affectionate and express love for each other in a platonic way, but in a way that's not common. It's not at the time and not since in television.
That's right. Tell him thank you. He got it exactly. It was, and it's people ask, and to me, it's always a little bit of a surprise when people ask, because I don't know how they can not know. But people ask if we were as close as it appeared to be, and I don't mean just Alan and me, but all of us. And I said it was a family, and it remains a family. We stay in touch. Every time we have an opportunity, we get together. It's a once in a lifetime experience doing a show like that.
And I'll tell you, I mean, having watched the reunion special of what was it, 2003, I think.
Mm-hmm. I produced that show.
Oh, okay.
I'm proud to say.
And I mean, it's for me, honestly, that I watched that special before I watched the entirety of the series. I almost feel like that laid the pipe for me to really appreciate the series.
Wow. Oh, that's nice.
Yeah,
that's nice. I'm thrilled that Larry was still with us, and so many of the guys and so many of the people were still with us.
Yeah. So as we wrap things up here, this is probably Mike, the most important question about MASH I can ask you, and that is, did Hawkeye and BJ ever see each other after the war?
I can't believe that they wouldn't have.
Uh-huh.
I can't believe that relationship would have ended there. I don't know that they would have ever spent a lot of time together, but I think they'd have been in touch, yeah.
There we go. I'll consider that canon.
Okay.
So I want to just thank you, first of all, for being so gracious with your time here, spending an hour. I used to hear you on the Stephanie Miller show back, when President Bush, and we were in the midst of the Iraq War, and from then to now, I was like, one of these days I want to be able to talk politics with Mike Farrell. So I'm grateful and humbled to be able to scratch that off my bucket list.
That's great that you're kind to have gone to the effort to do this. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to talk about so many of these wonderful things.
Well, Mike, again, thank you so much. And the legacy continues. I'm watching it with my kid, and I have every expectation that maybe one day he'll be watching it with his, and people will never stop watching MASH.
That's a great thought. Well, tell your boy I said hi.
I will do that. Thank you so much, Mike.
Okay. Take care.
And once again, big thanks to my guest Mike Farrell for coming on and joining me for the hour here on Nostalgia Theater as we celebrate 35 years since the finale of MASH. Now, as I mentioned during the conversation, I want to give a shout out to my friend Rob Kelly and his new podcast, MASHcast, a regular series where he goes through every single episode, and I gotta tell you, there's no one better equipped to guide you through the ins and outs and the intricacies of the MASH canon than my friend Rob. So please go subscribe to that show. And while we're talking about subscriptions, let's talk about this show. If you're digging what I'm doing, please go to iTunes, leave a star rating, leave a review. Every little bit helps. Let the world know what you think. And if you want to let me know what you want to see more of, please shoot me a line at moviefilmpodcast@gmail.com or hit like on our Facebook page, facebook.com/moviefilmpodcast. You can also find me at my website, zackiscorner.com. That's ZAKIS Corner. That's also my Twitter. That's also my Instagram. Lots of fun movie film stuff coming up. So I will leave it there, and I'll expect you to meet me back here next month for an all-new Nostalgia Theater. Thanks for listening, everybody.